For example, if you're 5x underpriced what you could be charging, you will build a $250,000 business at best when it should be a $1.25 million business. And frankly, if you're that far underpriced, you're probably not going to have the money to market and sell it in the way that it needs to be a successful business. Underpricing, bad value metrics, pricing that's overly complicated. There's a bunch of different ways to do it wrong. And there's only a few ways to do it right. It's another episode of Startups for the Rest of Us. I'm your host, Rob Walling, and in this episode, I talk about 6 things that I took away from our recent TinySeed batch kickoff. We did it just a couple weeks ago in New York City, and in these small group settings, I always notice struggles that many founders are experiencing and other things that I think would be helpful for you as a bootstrapped or mostly bootstrap founder. But before I dive into those, I want to let you know about the SaaS Institute. It is our premium coaching for 7- and 8-figure SaaS founders. We have B2B founders, we have B2C, and we are growing. So we've recently added 2 new coaches, Julian Marzouk and Ryan Angley. SaaS Institute is for founders who want community, who want coaching one-on-one and in a mastermind setting, and want advice from mentors like myself. And if you go to tinyseed.com/mentors, you can see the stable of mentors that you can tap into as a SaaS Institute founder. We also have a couple in-person events each year that are very small, like 10 to 15 people, I believe. And the founders in SaaS Institute are executing at a very high level. It's an amazing group to be part of. So if you're a 7- or 8-figure founder and you've been looking for community, mentorship, advice, coaching, masterminding, you should head to saasinstitute.com. And with that, I want to dive into 6 key takeaways that I pulled from our TinySeed kickoff a couple weeks ago as I sat in a beautiful conference room in an amazing hotel that producer Sonia picked for us in the Chelsea district of Manhattan. And Einar Volstead and myself and Alex Craig and producer Sonia hung out with about 15, I'm kind of guessing, but about 15 TinySeed founders, brand new. It's about batch 19 or 20 probably. It brings our total number of companies funded to 217, and now myself up to 241 investments in SaaS companies. But we spent a pretty incredible 2.5 days together. We had some dinners, we had some walks around Manhattan, we had some activities. You could call them team building, but it's just fun to meet the new founders and to build that camaraderie within that group, within the batch. We found that these kickoffs and these in-person events are so crucial to forming that cohesion that is going to have the batch really help one another. Because TinySeed is such an amazing network now of mentors, investors, founders, and having a kind of a smaller group that you can belong to, like your batch, it's like your high school class or your college class, is super important. And when you enter the room the first night, it's kind of awkward and you don't know any of the founders around the table. And by the time we all leave 2.5 days later, all of us feel like we know each other and like we've shared so much experience, and like I know their businesses so much better than the day we arrived. During the work sessions, which we have a solid one each day, we did some masterminding. We went around the room to all the founders and said, what tactic or strategy are you using with sales and marketing that is really working for you now? And it's one of my favorite parts of the event because I hear things that you don't see out in the wild. You don't see people talking about on X Twitter. I don't have them in my book. Like, people are being super creative and they're coming up with new and innovative ideas to find new leads, to close new deals. And then we have our famous pricing reviews or pricing teardowns where Craig Hewitt, Einar Volstead, and myself go through every founders pricing with say with a fine-tooth comb. I mean, we basically spend about 20 minutes, which doesn't sound like a lot. But you can really dig in. I mean, we are pattern matching based on hundreds and hundreds. Like we've seen bad pricing from folks that we haven't funded. We've seen good pricing from folks we funded, but most of the pricing we see has some issues. It's about 80% of any batch has an issue with the pricing. Sometimes they need to raise it. It's not always, but sometimes they need to raise it. Sometimes their pricing is just too complicated and they need to dramatically simplify it. And other times, their value metric is off. They're not measuring the right thing. And through conversations with the founders in the room, and everybody's in the room at once, and we just go around the room 20 minutes at a time. Really informative, and folks can start seeing our rules of thumb, the ways that we think about and evaluate pricing. And we dig into it this early because if your pricing's off, like it's the biggest lever in SaaS, right? I say this all the time. And if your pricing's off, it can be very hard, nigh impossible, to build a great 7 or 8 figure business. So that was the general course of events over those few days. And now I want to dive into my 6 takeaways. The first one is the importance of asking why. It's the importance of finding a root cause. And you don't even need to do the 5 whys. You may have heard of 5 whys. Oftentimes it's just one why. I see folks on Twitter saying, I've plateaued, what should I do? And my question is always, why are you plateaued? And there's a reason I wrote an entire microconf talk delineating and calling out the 7 and only 7 ways that a SaaS app can plateau, so that you at least have a menu to choose from of, if I'm plateaued, I think it's one of these 7 things. Because once you know that, it's not enough new leads. I've tapped out my entire market, which almost never happens. I've lost product market fit. There's all these different reasons, but once you figure that out, then you can at least come up with a plan. Or if you're struggling with churn, which a couple of the new TinySeed companies are, my first question is why? Why are they churning? How bad is churn? Is it a certain who is churning? Is it a certain ICP, non-ICP that's churning? And why? And you have to get that information in order to begin to troubleshoot it. There was one founder struggling with activation due to a demanding onboarding process. I say demanding, just a lot needs to get done for their customers to get value from the software. And so the first question that I asked that we dug into is, why is the process what it is, and what is it? Are there 2 or 3 components? Which part are they falling off on? Are all of them absolutely necessary? Can any of them be automated with AI? Can one of them be handled by a customer success person that you hire? Once we got into the meat and the nitty-gritty of what was actually going on and why people aren't finishing the onboarding process, that really helped us as a group. We were in a mastermind group, think it through. And this isn't hard or complicated. There's not a huge framework around this. On almost every advising or strategy call that I do with a founder, I usually wind up asking a lot of, why is that happening? It's gotten to the point where most founders will say, I'm sure you're going to ask me why. And I'm like, I am. Because without that, we're just guessing. Like, I'm struggling with churn, or I'm plateaued. What should I do? I can make some things up, but that's not helpful until you know why. And founders who succeed either are the ones that get super lucky and they never know why. And I don't want to base any approach that I have on luck. But most founders I see succeeding are the ones that do ask why. And they think about it logically, and they think about what's going on. And then, I can help you brainstorm or even pattern match on what I think you should do and will have the most success. But I can't do that unless we know why. Takeaway number 2 is that new customers, new revenue fixes everything unless you have high churn or your pricing is bad. I'm going to kind of gloss over the high churn because high churn is the death of SaaS. Churn in general is the death of SaaS. So you just can't outrun high churn. The thing I want to call out is that pricing is the biggest lever in SaaS. And if it's messed up, for example, if you're 5x underpriced what you could be charging, you will build a $250,000 business at best when it should be a $1.25 million business. You'll build a $400,000 business when it should be a $2 million ARR business. And frankly, if you're that far underpriced, you're probably not going to have the money to market and sell it in the way that it needs to be a successful business. Underpricing, bad value metrics, pricing that's overly complicated. There's a bunch of different ways to do it wrong. And there's only a few ways to do it right. I've heard some folks giving founders advice and saying, well, there are no right answers. And does that imply that any answer is equally good? Because that's not true. There may not be one correct way to price your SaaS, but if there are 1,000 different ways to do it, there are probably 2 or 3 that are really, really strong. And then there's another 6 or 7 that are so-so. And then the rest are probably garbage. And there's a reason that we see so many founders not succeeding, because they are underpricing or mispricing their product. New customers, new revenue can fix everything unless your pricing is screwed up. Takeaway number 3 is the pricing is the biggest lever in SaaS. And I think positioning is number 2. I've been saying this phrase, pricing is the biggest lever in SaaS, since the first TinySeed batch in 2019. And I saw across a swath of, I think we had 10 companies in that batch. And I started seeing that the pricing advice we were giving them, and folks either increasing their prices or going up market or changing their value metric, whatever it is that they corrected, seriously changed their business. And that has just played out over and over and over as we funded more and more companies. And I've always wondered in my head, what's the completion to that sentence? What's the next sentence after that? Pricing is the biggest lever in SaaS. But what's the second biggest lever? And I think it's positioning. This is the first time I'm saying this. So I'm trying this on for size. I'm trying to see how this feels. But the difference between us succeeding when we built Drip, which was my last SaaS startup, and it started as email marketing, and then it became lightweight marketing automation that doesn't suck. The difference between success and failure, I believe, was when we found our positioning. And it was positioning ourselves against I'll say the more simpler email service providers that are perfectly competent and good tools, right? MailChimp, great tool. I've always liked it. Aweber, whoever else we can think of that at the time didn't have any type of automations. And then positioning ourselves against the bigger incumbents as much less expensive, less complex, less onerous sales processes compared to Infusionsoft, which is now Keep, and Marketo, Pardot, Silverpop, whatever other marketing automation platforms you could think of. Once we leaned into that positioning, and we had to build the feature set to defend that positioning, but it was a realization that we could enter this market with a bunch of hated competitors. And our pricing was good. Our pricing was the biggest lever, and I think we did a good job with it. But I think our positioning was the other reason, and marketing and sales. I mean, we executed well, right? We built a great product, but a great product doesn't sell itself. And positioning is such a massive lever. And we talked about this with our founders, at the TinySeed kickoff, and about figuring out, how do you compare across the market? How do you compare to your competitors? I think of positioning as a bootstrapper, mostly bootstrap founder, as carving out a corner of the market. Why are you different? If you just build mostly a clone of an existing tool that is successful and has a brand name, you're just not going to win. You're just not going to grow because everyone will use that tool. But here's the thing. Could I just be cheaper? Well, if that's your positioning, maybe. Like if you're half the price or 20% of the price, so a fifth of the price of a big hated incumbent competitor, and you can still make really good money and build a great business at that price, that could be your positioning, that you are a less expensive but almost as capable version. Now, I don't like being the low price leader. I don't want the Walmart bargain shoppers coming to use my app, because the lower your prices, the higher your churn, the higher your support burden. You've heard it on this podcast over and over before. I'm not going to belabor it here, but there are other ways to position, like lightweight marketing automation that doesn't suck. What does that imply? Well, it implies it's much lighter weight. It doesn't do everything that those tools do, but it's lightweight. That feels liberating. It's probably pretty easy to use and doesn't suck. Oh yeah, that even reinforces that idea. And you can see this with any successful product if you go read their H1. The H1 on Signwell, founded by Ruben Gomez, is e-signature solutions built for simplicity. The H1 for SavvyCal from Derek Reimer is the fresh way to find a time to meet. The H1 of Senior Place, a TinySeed company, is HIPAA-compliant placement software built for professionals. Think about every word in those H1s. These are all successful companies by any measure. Those H1s position that product for professionals, for simplicity, for being a fresh way to do something. If you want to learn more about positioning, because I love that it's part art and part science and part trial and error and kind of hard to test often, and you have to kind of try it on and feel good about it. But you should watch the MicroConf talk by Anthony Pieri on SaaS founder positioning. I actually interviewed Anthony on this very podcast in episode 772, a highly effective framework for SaaS positioning. But I will say that watching the MicroConf talk on YouTube is better because they're visuals. If you want to dig into positioning, that's probably exactly where I would start. And there's obviously much more to talk about on that front. What if you could go from an idea to your first real user in 30 days? Not a prototype, not a promise, but an actual working app. Today's sponsor, Designly, will put that in writing. Here's their CEO, Keith Shields.
Thanks, Rob. Most founders burn months before a single user ever shows up. We'll put version 1 of your app in your user's hands by day 30 guaranteed. And if we miss that, your next month is free. We call it the TractionLab. It's a 90-day plan that takes you all the way from idea to your first paying customer. We start with a 30-minute call where you share your idea and we tell you exactly what we'll build and what it costs with no surprises. We can promise all of this because of our people, not our tooling. You get a full senior team focused on getting you traction. A product owner, an engineering lead, a full stack developer, a senior UX designer, and a solutions architect. They use AI to ship faster, but senior engineers own every architecture decision and review every line of code. So the code is yours and it's built to last. To go from idea to revenue in 90 days, check out designly.co/gettraction. That's designli.co/gettraction.
Takeaway number 4 is a pricing tip. That one of the quickest ways to test whether your lowest plan is actually doing you any benefit, because usually your lowest price plan, if you have 3 tiers plus call us, usually that lowest price plan has the highest churn and makes you, I won't say the least amount of money. I mean, it depends on how you're all set up, but I've seen a lot of folks with the famous TinySeed company that had a $19 plan whose churn was 11%. And then they had a $99 and up plan. And then they grouped their $99 and up plans and their churn was net negative. It was like net negative 4% or something. And those are just 2 entirely different businesses. So one quick way to test whether that lower end, that bottom end pricing plan is doing you good or harm is to just hide it. Just hide a div on your pricing page and watch your numbers. This is obviously where it's like a lower touch sign up. This is not sales led or high touch funnel, but this is a quick way to see, do you just lose a ton of those lower end customers or do they start migrating up to your middle plan? And then you get to dig into your numbers and look to see if folks signing up for your lowest plan in the past have those upgraded to your middle and up plans. Because if there is a migration path, an expansion path for them, then that lowest plan, even with high churn and likely more support, might just be worth it. But if it's causing you headache, if it's higher churn, if it's more support, and almost no one upgrades from that lowest plan, it's probably time to think about hiding that for a test and doing what we call a poor person's split test, which is to hide it and see what happens in the coming weeks. My 5th takeaway is that AI SEO is a thing. And so far, it feels quite a bit like non-AI SEO, with maybe slightly more emphasis on Reddit. But TinySeed companies, as well as TinySeed itself and MicroConf and this podcast and Rob Walling are all getting referrals and traffic from LLMs, ChatGPT, Claude, etc. And folks are paying attention. I know some folks who are paying for ChatGPT ads. It's like the Wild West there. But there are TinySeed founders paying for ads. There are folks trying to get the LLM mentions by creating content. Sometimes it's programmatic creation. Sometimes it is by hand. But AI SEO, as the world moves away from 10 blue links, AI SEO is a thing. And it will continue to be. And there are differences between traditional SEO, but those are just the subtleties of the algorithm. When we think about Google SEO and what it's looked like for the past 20 years, it has changed over time, right? And every 6 to 12 months, Google seems to release another big update to their algorithm. That means SEO itself, Google SEO specifically, has been a moving target. But what Google's trying to do is find the right search results for your query. They're trying to find the most authoritative. They're trying to find the one that answers your question or helps you get to what you want with the minimum amount of effort. And that's essentially what the LLMs are trying to do, right? They're trying to answer your questions. So they're also looking for authoritative resources. They might be doing it in a different way, a slightly different way, but as these algorithms get smarter, assuming that they do, that's a question mark. As they improve, though, it does feel a lot like there's a ton of overlap with traditional SEO and AI SEO, although there are differences. But I actually enjoy the Wild West feeling of this right now, both of ChatGPT ads and thinking about SEO in terms of trying to rank both in Google and in the LLMs. And the folks I know who've done really well with Google organic rankings generally seem to be doing all right with the LLMs. It's not across the board. I have obviously seen counterexamples, of folks where they're just losing traffic. And it's usually the ones that I've seen, it's where they gamed Google, right? They gamed the organic SEO, and the LLMs maybe are doing it differently, and they're a little smarter than that. And so they care less about links and they care more about, some mentions on Reddit, whatever it is. But if I were a startup founder today, to me, this is where quite a bit of opportunity lies. It's in these Wild West kind of unknown territories where I think you can really latch onto something and kickstart a great business. And my sixth and final takeaway from the TinySeed kickoff here in mid-2026 is to be around other people who are doing what you're doing. I think back to myself getting started as a bootstrapper, building and launching my first thing on the internet in 2000, let's say 2 or 3. I don't remember the exact year. And I didn't know a single person talking about it, thinking about it, or doing it the way that I was. It was all about venture capital. And it was hard because I didn't know if it was possible. I didn't know the mistakes other people were making. So I had to make all my mistakes myself. And then I found Joel Spolsky and I found Paul Graham. Now, not about bootstrapping, but just about startups. And then I started blogging. And then I found Patrick McKenzie and Peldi Gilzoni and later Jason Cohen. I think he started blogging around 2009. And one of the reasons that I started this podcast and MicroConf with my co-founder, Mike Tabor at the time, was because we wanted to be around other people who were doing what we were doing. It goes beyond being the average of the 5 people you hang around with. It just gets lonely. And you make a lot of mistakes if you don't look at prior art. If you don't look at the books, the podcasts, the events that are happening in your space, and if you aren't in some type of small mastermind or some community where people are trying things and you can all learn collectively and you can learn from each other, if you're not doing that, you're going to make a ton of mistakes that you don't need to. You're going to burn out. You're going to be super lonely. And to see the energy that was created almost out of nothing by getting those founders in the room a couple weeks ago was just electrifying. And I think I took away as much energy as the founders who were there to kick off their batch year and to learn from us, but also to learn from each other. And being around other folks, it provides motivation. It provides, I think, a little bit of friendly competition. It goes a long way. Like John Lennon and Paul McCartney talked a lot about how one would write a really good song and then the other one said, well, now I got to go write a really good song. That friendly competition drove the Beatles to be the best band of all time, hands down. Fight me IRL if you don't agree with me. But being around other founders who are doing what they're doing and having a friendly competition of being like, well, they're making it work. I'm motivated now to make it work too. Oh, it is possible to do this. As you look around and see other bootstrap founders that are doing 7 and 8 figures, and there's a lot of them. I haven't mentioned this on the show recently, but of all the TinySeed companies we've backed, something like 22% are now doing 7 or 8 figures of ARR. It's a significant number of companies. And being around that kind of momentum and that kind of community, being around other people who are doing what you're doing is invaluable. And I wished that I'd had that opportunity when I was getting started, and I wish I knew the value of it 20-something years ago when I was getting started. And that is one of the reasons that TinySeed is structured the way it is with batches. It would be so much easier If we were just a venture fund and just invested here and there in startups, it would be way cheaper. It'd be less travel. It'd be less time, effort, attention, energy, all those things. It would be a simpler business. But A&R and I, when we started it, we didn't believe in that. We knew that community was a huge part of it. We want to provide mentorship, advice, guidance, and funding. But without community, I think you are losing a huge portion of the benefit of this type of program. So those are my 6 takeaways from the TinySeed kickoff here in May of 2026. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed those takeaways as I ran through them. Thanks for listening this week and every week. This is Rob Walling signing off from episode 838.